So let's chant the prayer. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Okay. So if you would need to summarize the invocation in a sentence or in a phrase, how would you do that? What's the kind of most abiding impression of the invocation in your mind? I can see Prema smiling very mischievously. I can't hear you. Haribol, Divya in heaven, nice to see you.
Haribol, sorry I'm a little late. I just need to spin my iPad around.
Okay. Okay, so Prema, can anyone else hear Prema, or is it just... Okay, so if you want, you can write it in the chat. And anyone else, what some way to summarize the invocation? Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamadachyate mantra. Yashoda Priya?
Krishna is complete, and everything that comes from him is complete also.
Okay. Okay, that's good. That's good. Anybody else got a way to summarize it? Okay. Let's see if we'll find Prema's conclusions at some point. I still can't hear you, so you need to write in the chat. Haribol Cat, nice to see you as well. Radha Hari says she's a bit feeling unwell, so she's only with her camera switched off. But we hope she will feel better by next week, even sooner. Okay, so we can start mantra 1. It's a good exercise, especially with these Isopanisad mantras. They're a bit longer, to try to just kind of summarize it in your head, like a sentence or a phrase, and then it's kind of, it will kind of create a full picture of Isopanisad by the end of the course. Okay, so we got something here. Okay, yeah, I can't unmute you, Prema, because according to my system, you are unmuted. Maybe, I don't know if you want to leave and then come back. I don't know if that, anyway, I don't know if that would help. Okay, let's chant the mantra. Ishavasyamidam sarvam yatkincha jagatyam jagat tena tyaktena bunjita magridaha kasya svidhanam. Okay, Kat, could you read the translation, please?
Everything animate or inanimate that is within the universe is controlled and owned by the Lord. One should therefore accept only those things necessary for himself which are set aside as his quota, and one should not accept other things, knowing well to whom they belong.
Okay, so this is the actual first verse of the Isopanishad. We said the invocation was kind of added to it. Okay, and just as a reminder, this is the kind of structure of the Isopanishad. So invocation to mantra 3 is living in harmony with the Ishvara. This is the Ishavasya principle that this verse describes. It starts with this word Ishavasyam. If you know that everything is owned and controlled by the Lord, and if you live according to that principle, then you can live very peacefully. You'll see from the next verses. So this is the first section of Isopanisad, living in harmony with the Ishvara. The second section is how to know this Ishvara that we are living in harmony with. We can know him by spiritual vision. Third section, how to develop that spiritual vision. Fourth section is the right and wrong kind of worship for the Ishvara. And the final section is prayers to the Ishvara that he reveals himself. So this is the overview of Isopanishad. We had invocation, which is everything is complete and perfect. Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate. And now this mantra one that we are on just now, everything belongs to the Ishvara. So this is, you could say, this is the focus of this verse. Prabhupada's purport. This is like a summary of Prabhupada's purport. First two paragraphs are, they speak about the glory of Vedic literature. It's a little bit similar to the introduction, that lecture by Srila Prabhupada that's kind of included as the introduction for Isopanishad. Then the third and fourth paragraphs, how the Lord is the proprietor of everything, which is the analysis of the first line, Ishavasyam idam sarvam. Then example of one's quota in nature. For example, animals, they don't take more than their quota. They don't take something different, that's their quota. If a cow will not start hunting and eating fish or something else, or just any animal, they just eat what's their quota, what's their kind of what's the food that they're supposed to eat, and they also don't overeat. So you don't usually see animals in nature who are overeating. And then the next section, paragraph 6 to 8, example of quota of humans using the earth resources, and what happens if they don't follow their quota, i.e. they take more than what's allotted to them. And then we can see that very clearly in today's society, what are the results of people living more opulently or more luxuriously than their quota, and then using up the earth's resources. There's some websites or apps on the internet where you can see how much is your kind of footprint, not just carbon footprint, but in general. Like if everybody lived the way you live, how many earths would you need to sustain humanity? And most people in Western society, even devotees who kind of don't eat meat, you would need at least 1.5 to 2 earths for everyone to be able to live like that. So it's something quite thought-provoking, something we need to think about, not to use more than our quota. And then example of quota in human diet, we don't eat meat. Then Prabhupada also explains that it's not just not eating meat, but also eating prasadam, because eating plants also creates reaction. And then the conclusion, living according to the Ishavasya principle, is perfect living. So this Ishavasya principle will come up again and again. So don't forget that it means that understanding that the Lord is the owner and proprietor and controller of everything, and living accordingly. So that's the Ishavasya principle. Okay. So first of all, we said that the beginning of the purport speaks about the glory of Vedic literature. Now we spoke about this last week. Does anyone remember how Prabhupada explained why we need Vedic literature? Kat?
He said that because our senses are defective, we can't like the knowledge that we kind of come up with or receive, we can't perceive it properly. So we need like knowledge from the authorized source, which is in the Vedic literature, because that's the perfect knowledge, and we can't, with our sense, we can't perceive it.
Yeah, perfect. So human beings have the 4 defects. Remember these 4 doors? So imperfect senses, tendency to make these mistakes, be illusioned, and cheat. So we can't make up perfect knowledge, and also we can't perceive perfect knowledge. So that's why we need the Vedas, which are perfect because they come from God. And we need the acharyas, the great spiritual teachers, to understand. Because if we try to understand it on our own, then due to our 4 defects, we are still liable to misunderstand it. So that's the significance of the Vedas. And Prabhupada explains that the Vedas are called apurusheya. So purusha means like, it means many things, but in this sense, it means like a human being. So apurusheya is something that's beyond humans, like transhuman. I don't know if that's a word, but it's beyond human beings. So when we try to get knowledge, then our 4 defects are obstacles in this. But if we get the knowledge of the Vedas, which is coming from Krishna through the bona fide disciplic succession, then that way we can get the perfect knowledge. Okay. And then I think last week we spoke quite a bit about the kind of structure of the different Vedas, because in this purport, Prabhupada mentions how the Isopanisad is part of the Yajur Veda. So I thought I would include this slide here. So you can see Isha Upanishad with the red, it's underlined with red. So it's part of the Shukla Yajur Veda. There is a Krishna, which is like a black or dark. Shukla is white. And we spoke last week about how each Veda is divided into Samhitas, Brahmanas, Aranyakas, and Upanishads. So the Isopanishad belongs to the Upanishad part of the Shukla Yajur Veda. And you can see all the other Upanishads, not all of them, but some of the other Upanishads and Aranyakas and Brahmanas. Okay. Okay. Then next, Prabhupada speaks about how the Lord is the proprietor of everything, which is the analysis of the first line, Isha Vasyamidam Sarvam. The Lord is the controller and owner of everything. And we spoke about this before, I think with the Nectar of Instruction, but also with Bhagavad Gita. Krishna has 2 kinds of energies, Paraprakriti and Aparaprakriti. Of course, Krishna has unlimited energies, but in some ways you can divide it into 2, at least the energies in the material world. Paraprakriti is the living entities, the jiva. And then Aparaprakriti is the lower prakriti, the lower energies, is material nature. Anyone remembers the verses from chapter 7 that describe these different, Krishna separated energies, the Aparaprakriti? Starts with Bhumir, Apo, Nalo, Vayur, Kham. Anyone remembers? Divya Vrindavan, you're smiling. Is it because you know the verse, or?
No, I was just smiling at your lovely prompts, Jana. Sorry, so no, I don't. Sorry.
Okay.
I wish I did, but I don't.
Okay. Yashoda Priya?
I vaguely remember it's like at the beginning of the 7th chapter, like 7, 4 to 5 or something like that.
Yeah.
Earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and false ego, my separated energies, or something like that.
Yeah, so altogether, these are my separated energies. Bhumira punalo vayu kamhano buddhirevacha ahankara mitiyam bhina prakriti ashtada. So these are the separated energy. And then Krishna says, Apareyam itastvanyam prakrite vidhime param jiva bhuta mahabaho yaidam dharya tejaga. So jiva bhuta, but above them there are the jivas, the living entities who are struggling with this material nature. So these are the two energies: apara prakriti, which is earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, force, ego. So all the kind of non-living things, and then para prakriti is the jivas. So these are the two energies of Krishna in the material world. And everything we see around us is a combination of these two, which means that everything is Krishna's energy. If we want to be the owner and the controller, that results in frustration, dissatisfaction, because that's not the natural state of things. We may own something temporarily, but at any time it can be taken away. And if we become attached to it, if we start kind of thinking this is mine, then that just leads to a lot of frustration. So our ownership is a limited and temporary ownership, whereas Krishna's ownership is real, eternal, and full ownership. So that's the difference between us owning things, or us being proprietors, and Krishna owning things. So it's not so much that we own things, it's more that temporarily something is in our care. When you have children, it's a really good lesson that temporarily you look after these jivas, these living entities, and at first they're really dependent on you, and there's a really strong sense that they are mine. But then they grow up and they are their own people, and you can't own them anymore. Of course, they always remain your son or your daughter, but they are their own people. So it's a good exercise to practice detachment and understanding that I might temporarily in an illusory way own something or someone, but that ownership doesn't last. So we shouldn't see ourselves as owner, but more like someone who needs to take care of others, other people, other things. Okay. And because everything belongs to Krishna, that means that we shouldn't take more than what's our quota. That's how nature, that's how the world is set up. And every living entity, Prabhupada explains, every living entity follows this. If you remember, I think in the third verse of Nectar of Instruction, Prabhupada says, if you leave a sack of grains on the street, then birds come and they just take a few grains and then they fly away. But a human being will come and take the whole sack. So, of course, we need to look after ourselves, and we need to think of tomorrow. But the point Prabhupada is making there, that there is this greed that we're trying to take more than our quota. Okay. And now in the purport, it's not in this paragraph, but I thought we could speak about it now, because we're speaking about human life, animal life, Krishna's different energies. So I wanted you to look at the it's as the end of the 9th paragraph. I read the whole paragraph as well. Maybe Divya Vrindavan, can you read this paragraph, the standard of life for human beings? Just that one paragraph.
Yeah, sure, no problem. The standard of life for human beings cannot be applied to animals. The tiger does not eat rice and wheat or drink cow's milk because he has been given food in the shape of animal flesh. Among the many animals and birds, some are vegetarian and others are carnivorous. But none of them transgress the laws of nature, which have been ordained by the will of the Lord. Animals, birds, reptiles, and other lower life forms strictly adhere to the laws of nature. Therefore, there is no question of sin for them, nor are the Vedic instructions meant for them. Human life alone is a life of responsibility.
I want you to think about this sentence. Human life alone is a life of responsibility. Okay, so what do we understand by responsibility here? What does Prabhupada mean here in this purport? So I'd like to think about it a little bit. Maybe if you want, you could share your understanding, realization, have a little discussion on this. A little clue is in the kind of part before, nor are the Vedic instructions meant for them. That's quite an important point. Nilacha Chandra Prabhu?
My understanding is, I guess, that Vedic instructions, because otherwise we'll just leave an animalistic life, so we'll be no different to the animals. So in this human form, we're given the, I guess, the ability to understand the Vedic instructions and to free yourself from this whole process of, rebirths, and that's my understanding.
Yeah, that's very good. That's very good. So that's our responsibility, to free ourselves from rebirth and follow Vedic instructions. Kat, you got something?
Yeah, I was thinking because in the introduction, Srila Prabhupada talks about Varnashram and how that's like, the Vedas are all, like, they explain the Varnashram system, and that can help like the world be peaceful. And maybe that implies that we should be responsible to maybe follow Varnashram, and also like to come to this level of spiritual realization through an ashram system, and also give it to others, because then we're not just freeing ourselves, but we're also freeing others, because we're giving them like spiritual knowledge and helping them progress in their spiritual life as well.
Okay, so that's really nice. Kat says it's not just, we're not just responsible for ourselves, but we are also responsible for helping others. That's a really nice point. Thank you. Anything else? Prima, I hope we can hear you now.
Is it working?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay. I was thinking of the Bhagavad Gita verse where it says the devotees of the Lord are released from all kinds of sin because of food which is offered first for sacrifice. So like all the other kind of animals and lower life forms can just eat according to their nature and according to what's available to them. But the devotees have to actually offer according to, they have to make an offering out of it, and they have to only then offer things that are offerable. So that you've got a responsibility, not just in choosing what type of foodstuffs to eat, but also that it should be, done in devotional services.
Yeah, so Prabhupada also makes this point. It's not enough just to be a vegetarian. In fact, it's in the next paragraph. It's not enough to be a vegetarian. One should also offer it to the Lord. Very good. Anything else? Yashoda-priya, you got something, or is it just?
I think I'm sort of stitching everyone's comments together, especially, but with regards to like human life is the only life or species in which can generate karma as well, and that you have to be responsible for your actions for that particular thing. So it's because we also have the cognitive ability in order to understand to be able to understand spirituality, understand and inquire why are we here. So taking Vedic instructions is very important to be able to understand the differences properly and actually be able to work in the correct way.
Yeah, that's perfect. So animals just follow instinct. They don't really have a choice. And because they don't have a choice, then they don't karma. And also the Vedic instructions are not for them because they don't have a choice. Human beings, on the other hand, they have a choice. They have some freedom. And with freedom comes responsibility to make the right choice. So human life alone is a life of responsibility. Because you have choice, because you have freedom, you have a responsibility to make the right choices and to use that freedom to become like completely free, to get out of the material world. So that's the great responsibility of the human form of life. So you're given a really good opportunity, and it's your responsibility not to waste it. Okay, so some of these sentences are really good to kind of think about it a little and contemplate it.
Can I just add something, Jennifer? Because
please.
I don't know if I'm on the wrong track with what I was thinking, but it also made me think a bit about when Srila Prabhupada talks about the necessity of yagya, like austerity, that
Yeah.
you know we must realize that we have like an eternal duty, really, to kind of to dovetail our life with Krishna as a form of yagya, that without the austerities of human society, like this is how the material world is kind of enmeshed in lust, anger, greed, you know, and there's so much of so much quarrel and hypocrisy in Kali. I don't know if I'm kind of coming at that at the right angle, but
I think you're on the right track, because the
made me
next
think
verse
about that.
speaks about the need for yagya to become free from karma bandhana. So definitely it's there. So that's what Vedic instructions tell us, that we need to perform yagya. And that's our responsibility to follow. Good. Anyone else got anything to add? Okay. Okay, so a little bit more about how everything belongs to the Lord. So if we look at, let's say, our house or our home, all the ingredients either directly or indirectly are created by God or come from things that are created by Him. So if we use stones to build our home or wood, then that's directly. If we use bricks that are, you could say, man-made, but man makes them from materials that are put there by God. So everything belongs to Krishna. Everything is his energy, everything comes from him. And even the intelligence and the ability and the skills to make bricks, to build a house, that also comes from him. So if we are conscious of this, that everything belongs to God, everything is controlled by God, then we can live according to this Ishavasya principle, and we can live a life of responsibility. And the next verse will describe what happens if we live according to this Ishavasya principle, but I will leave that as a surprise for the second half of the class. But if we don't live like that, if we don't just take our quota, and if we don't acknowledge Krishna's ownership and controllership, then we are encroaching on others' property and will be punished. And Prabhupada, quite interestingly, I think it's in this purport. Yeah, he speaks about capitalists and communists. Okay, that one's got one idea about who everything belongs to. Communists think that everything belongs to the people, everything should be distributed equally. Capitalists have another idea. But Prabhupada explains that they're both misguided, they're both misled, because neither of them acknowledge the ownership and controllership of God. Prabhupada gives a somewhat contextual example, from that particular time period when he wrote this. But this is capitalists and communists. It could be Athens and Sparta, like from the classical age. It could be America and China from nowadays. The particular example doesn't really matter, but that's something that people could relate to at the time. So that's why Prabhupada gave that example. The point is that they both claim to be right. They both claim the world belongs to them, but because they don't acknowledge God, then they're both wrong. I got a slide on these different social systems. This is just a real quick kind of summary, just so we have like a somewhat Vedic or Krishna conscious understanding of them. People spend many decades on university studying them, so I'm not claiming to be an expert, but it's an interesting overview. So in communism, the idea is that everything belongs to the people, and it tries to impose an artificial equality on the material level. So the idea is everybody gets paid the same amount, whether you are a farmer or a university lecturer or a shopkeeper. Even if you're a shopkeeper, the shop doesn't belong to you, of course. Everybody gets paid the same. But because of this artificial equality, talents, efforts are not rewarded, and it makes people very lazy. There is no effort. It's like, being in school and everybody gets the same mark for their exam, irrespective of how hard you studied and how well you did. It would make my job very easy. When marking Bhakti Shastri exams, I would just write 100 on everybody's. But we know that that's not the right thing to do. And because, it creates this kind of laziness, because there is no incentive for people to work, to think, then the economy goes down. So I had the good fortune of growing up in a somewhat communist or socialist country. And, in the UK, when you go in the shop, like not Tesco, but, like in a clothes shop or whatever, people, the sales assistant comes to you, oh, how can I help you? Is there something in particular you're looking for? Or even if they don't go up to you, if you ask them, they will help you. When I was growing up, if you went into a shop, nobody cared. The sales assistants continued chatting and polishing their nails or whatever. And even if you went to them and asked them, where can I find this? Where they just looked at you like, how can you be so horrible to disturb them? Because there was no, if they saw one pair of shoes in a month or 100 pair of shoes, they got the same pay. So there was like no reason for them to work harder. And then that's the same for everything else, for scientists, for everybody else, it was the same. So after a while, it doesn't, it's a nice idea. It's a very idealistic, utopian idea, but it doesn't work. Economy goes down, people live in scarcity, and they stay dissatisfied. And the other thing is that we know from Animal Farm, the book by George Orwell, and also from practical experience, that even though everybody is equal, some are more equal than others. And then that creates a lot of other problems. So this happens when they try to achieve artificial material equality. So when we artificially try to make everyone equal on a material level, it doesn't work because everybody is not equal. Capitalism, this does reward material differences. So if you are more talented in something, if you work harder, if you are more lucky, then you do get more wealth, more power, position. But then it also leads to exploiting others. And it's very cruel competition. That those who are kind of less fortunate, they really not looked after or cared for. And that creates a lot of dissatisfaction, insecurity, a lot of problems as well. So communism tries to achieve artificial material equality. Capitalism only focuses on material variety. So they both really on the material level. But if we look at the Varnashram, it integrates spiritual equality with material variety. So materially, we will never be equal. I will never be able to sing like, I don't know, Madonna. I don't know if she's a good singer, but she's quite famous anyway. I never be able to run as fast as, I don't know, some great athlete. That's just not the body I was given. So materially, we'll never be equal. But spiritually, we are all equal because we are all spirit soul, we are all jiva, we are all part and parcel of Krishna. So Varnashram accepts both the fact that we are materially different and that we are spiritually equal. So Varnashram encourages us to realize our spiritual perfection, spiritual equality through our materially different natures. So our materially different natures are engaged according to our inclinations, our tendencies. And that means that people will feel comfortable, they will feel enthusiastic to do what they are doing. You know, if you can do something that you are good at and enjoy, then you'll be much better at it. And that's good for you, that's good for society. So that's a big advantage of Varnashram. And while working in that way, properly situated, then you're also going towards God, you're also going towards Krishna. So it fulfills the spiritual purpose while also looking after the bodily necessities. And this way, this principle of Ishavasya is implemented. Does anyone remember what is Ishavasya? We kind of keep coming back to this Ishavasya. This is the verse. Kat?
Understand that the Lord is the proprietor and owns everything, and acting according to that.
Yeah, so the Lord is the owner and the controller of everything and acting according to that. So Varnashram helps implement this principle. And just some more little points that Brahmanas are the ones who kind of accept it most, they teach it, they live by it, but they don't enforce it. So Brahmanas are not the enforcers of this system. That's the Kshatriyas. So the Brahmanas give guidance and then the Kshatriyas put it into practice. They are practically managing it. So Ishavasya can be implemented in society. Okay. Anyone, any questions or points? Realizations about different social systems? So another point Prabhupada makes is about human diet. So even though in most parts of the world it's customary to eat meat, it's not actually the standard way for human beings to eat. Even our anatomy, the way our teeth are, the way our kind of stomach, intestines are, it shows that we are meant to be vegetarian or at most eat very, very little meat. So we're not meant to be kind of meat eaters. Also, it's better for our health. I think society is realizing that more and more that it's better for our health not to eat meat. It's better for the environment. One of the greatest contributors to global warming is the meat industry. And aside from all that, compassion for animals. So very few people would continue eating meat if they had to kill the animal themselves. So it's not really normal. And then there's also the scriptural injunction that people shouldn't eat meat. There is some concession in the Vedas for eating meat. We don't deny that, but it's a concession. It's not an instruction. So if somebody can't live without eating meat, they're so attached to that, then there is a concession of you can do it in a certain way. On a dark moon night, you can take a goat outside the village and then whisper into its ear that, you know, I'm eating you now, and in your next life you can eat me, and then you can kill the goat and eat it. If anybody wants to eat a goat after all that, but the idea is that it's not a normal thing. And of course, plants are also living entities, and plants also suffer to some extent if we kill them, but the difference is huge. So pulling a carrot from the earth and killing a cow or a pig or a goat, there is a huge difference. Everybody can see that. And a lot of the plants that we eat would perish anyway. So, you know, if we don't eat the apples, they will just fall on the ground and kind of rot away, become part of the ground, or the birds eat them, or the slugs. And also, if we just kind of look at the atmosphere in a harvest festival and the slaughterhouse, there is a huge difference. I don't know who said this, some famous person said, if slaughterhouses had glass walls, people wouldn't eat meat. because they would see all the suffering that they're creating. And then Prabhupada takes this idea further. He says it's not just that we are vegetarian, we are also prasadarians. So we don't just want to decrease our karmic entanglement by eating something that doesn't require so much violence, but we want to get rid of karmic entanglement altogether, and that's possible by offering our food to Krishna. Prema made this point about how, that makes us more conscious of Krishna. And if you remember that verse at the end of chapter 5, Bhagavad Gita, Bhoktaram yagatapasam sarvaloka maheshwaram sukhridam sarvabhutanam gatva mam shantim richati. So that verse basically says if you realize that Krishna is the supreme controller, the supreme enjoyer, and the supreme friend, then you'll be peaceful. So when we offer our food, then that increases our awareness that the Lord is the supreme proprietor, because the food is given by him. The Lord is the supreme enjoyer, because we cook for his pleasure. And the Lord is the supreme friend, because the food is infused by his mercy. He takes away all the karmic reactions, sinful desires. And also, prasadam is a reciprocation of love between the devotee and Krishna. So cooking, offering, taking prasadam increases our awareness of Krishna being the supreme controller, supreme proprietor, supreme enjoyer, and supreme friend. So that's why prasadam is very, very important. Okay. There is another sentence that I wanted to discuss a little bit in this purport. Yeah, so it's the first sentence of the last paragraph. I don't know, Manju, could you just read this last paragraph, the root of sin?
The root of sin is deliberate disobedience to the laws of nature through disregarding the proprietorship of the Lord. Disobeying the laws of nature or the order of the Lord brings ruin to a human being. Conversely, one who is sober, who knows the laws of nature and who is not influenced by unnecessarily attachment or aversion, is sure to be recognized by the Lord and thus become eligible to go back to Godhead, back to the eternal home.
Thank you. So the bit I would like to discuss is the root of sin is deliberate disobedience to the laws of nature. Okay, so we can think about this a little bit. And unfortunately on Zoom, we can't do little skits or role plays or dramas, but when we do Bhakti Shastri in like face to face, then we usually do a little drama at this point. But the idea is that how would you explain this, or how would you discuss this either with a politician or policeman who's trying to reduce crime statistics, or with a priest, in a Catholic priest, original sin, that kind of idea. So you can choose either, and then kind of give some comments or arguments based on this part of a sentence. The root of sin is deliberate disobedience to the laws of nature. Any thoughts? Divya Vrindavan, you got some? Oh, okay. You got something? Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Let's have Divya Vrindavan first, if she's got something, and then Nilacha Chandra Prabhu.
I was only thinking a little bit about the police. I was thinking a little bit about my work actually. I'm a social worker still, and I work for children's services. I work kind of in and around child protection. So we come into contact with a lot of people who've kind of committed criminal activity, either through substance misuse, possession of substances, or have been violent. Often domestic abuse is one of the still most prevalent things. So it was making me think about speaking to a policeman about that. And I don't know if I'll articulate it very well, but I was just thinking about how the in reference to the root of sin, a deliberate disobedience to the laws of nature, how more and more I just see at work how like human nature is, we've just completely lost our way, and everyone is so embedded in kind of the sense gratification and material platform, therefore wanting to constantly just enjoy and consume and satisfy their senses, which violates kind of any sense of like moral duty or value. So therefore we then see that kind of played out within the modes of material nature and then the society we live in. So that the root, for me, like the root of, so speaking to a policeman, the root of crime would be me trying to say, well, people have moved away from any sense of like Kat was talking about Varnashram Dham, like any sense of kind of categories of identifying your nature and your occupational duty and how to live a life that is kind of in the mode of goodness. And if we were to come back to that sort of lifestyle, then maybe criminal activity, substance misuse, violent, harmful relationships, which then impact on children, and then we see children learning from these types of behaviours, and it becomes a perpetual cycle. So hopefully we would see an improvement in human society.
And that's a really good point, and I guess you're probably the most qualified among us to.
Oh, I don't know. Materially qualified, not
a lot of practical experience.
but
yeah,
like I have some thoughts.
Yeah, like greed, like desire for constant sense gratification, thinking that I have a right to this, rather than realizing that I have a right to my quota if I do my duty, but I don't have a right to any more than that. So disobedience to the laws of nature means that you don't abide by this law that I got a quota, and I'm even supposed to use that quota in the service of God, not just for myself. Root of sin. But it's a really good point. Thank you for that. Nilacha Chandra Prabhu?
It was on similar lines. So just when they were talking about this climate change, and everyone can see that because they're abusing nature and basically trying to make more money, being greedy, and throwing all the waste down the sea and wondering why all the fishes become, so part of that is it's sort of like, even though all these people, they realize what they're doing, they're still, I mean, it's really amazing to watch them, where they're trying to buy the quotas from the third world countries so they can pollute even more. And I'm like, seriously? So I guess for me, then we live in that society where if our leaders are doing that, how does it go down? Everyone else is going to say, well, they're doing it, so why shouldn't we? What we do is this little bit, all those little bits add up. So I guess that's my understanding. I don't know.
It's a really good point, both that Divya Vrindavan was speaking about on an individual level, you're speaking on the level of countries or societies, that we buy, quite often these developed nations, they ship their nuclear wastes or, toxic waste to third world countries for some money. It doesn't get rid of the problem, but at least they don't have to deal with it. And then, like leaders, if they behave in this way. There was this climate change conference a few months ago, and all these leaders arrived in their own private jets, kind of creating so much more carbon emissions and everything. And when somebody asked them, they said, well, China's doing so much carbon emissions. So what does this matter? So it's like, you got completely the wrong attitude. How are you going to take the world forward? Yeah, but it all boils down to the same thing, that we want more than our allotted quota. We want to enjoy more than our allotted quota. Okay, anyone else? Kat, please.
Yeah, I just thought the disobedience to the laws of nature, and I thought to a policeman explain like in the countries and in the world we have laws of the country and the government laws, and when someone disobeys them, then they get sent to prison. So like it's just like that, similar like to their laws, we have the laws of nature in everywhere that are universal, and if you disobey them, you get a reaction to that.
Yeah, sometimes it's not as straightforward. If you murder someone and then you put in jail, that's quite kind of, you can see cause and effect. But because it sometimes happens in your next life, or you don't realize that this is a reaction, then sometimes, but it's a very good example that just as there are laws in the country, there are laws of nature, and if you don't obey them, then we're going to suffer. It's a very good point. Thank you, Kat. Anyone else? Manjali, please.
I'm not sure if I'm on the right track, but I was just thinking about how you were saying that humans aren't meant to eat meat, and sort of just trying to explain that, following that there are positive consequences, like ahimsa, non-violence, we're protecting the cows, we're protecting the animals, and there are benefits for that. Eating sattvic food, it means you're healthier, you're happier, you're more peaceful, and that kind of permeates through the society if everyone follows that kind of lifestyle. That's all I have. That's one thing that stuck with me, that has a positive knock-on effect.
Yeah, that's a really good point, that we're talking about the negative, what happens if you don't follow the laws of nature. But like Manjari says, if you do follow, then everything becomes more happy and peaceful and better society. So that's what devotees are trying to achieve by practicing in their own life and also by preaching. Thank you. Thank you for that. So just to finish off this verse, I read the translations by Madhvacharya and Vedanta Deshika and Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So for the same verse that we are talking about, Ishavasyamidam Sarvam, this is Prabhupada's translation. The other acharyas give a very similar one, but I just thought it will reinforce the same message if we read slightly different translations as well. So Madhvacharya says, enjoy what is given by him, the owner, and don't ask for anything else. Vedanta Deshika, he says, one should take only what is necessary for maintaining the body. That way, both the objective of jnana, which is the renunciation of material objects, and continued life, which necessitates material objects, is fulfilled. And he says, the Lord is inside and outside of everything in this world and beyond. Therefore, experience the objects of the world with a sense of detachment, since nothing belongs to the self. Don't desire anyone else's wealth. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur, his conclusion is that offer everything to the Lord, and whatever little you accept, take it as the mercy given by the Lord. Then everything becomes spiritual. Okay, so it's a nice meditation. Whatever you get, take it as Krishna's mercy. And if you live in that consciousness, everything becomes spiritual. Okay, it's really nice meditation. Okay, we ready for the next mantra? Kat, you got something?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about that previous bit about the deliberate like the part where it says the deliberate avoiding, was it that? Yeah, the deliberate disobedience of laws of nature. Does that mean if you do it undeliberately, then you won't get a reaction? Or where does sort of the deliberate part come in?
If you know that it's wrong and you still do it, then you get more of a reaction than if you don't know. But even if you don't know, you still get a reaction.
Okay.
So the root of sin is deliberate disobedience. So that's like knowingly disobeying the laws of nature. And because we are human beings, we spoke about that before, that we have this responsibility, we have the choice, we have the intelligence, we have the knowledge, we have the Vedic scriptures. So we should know what the laws of nature are, what the laws of God, Krishna are. And if we know them but disobey them, that's the root of sin. Is that okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Yashoda Priya, you got something?
Just to add to that, would that mean that if you know that the right thing to do is in the scriptures and still decide not to follow it, or still decide not to read them or brush yourself up on this knowledge, then you're also sort of deliberately acting against the laws of nature as well, in an indirect way. I don't know if I've made...
Like, you know that you should be reading the scriptures and finding out what's the right thing to do, but you're not. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I can read the next verse. Kurvan eveha karmani jijivishe chatam sama evam tvai nanyate tosti na karma lipyate nare. Prema, could you read the translation?
One may aspire to live for hundreds of years if he continuously goes on working in that way, for that sort of work will not bind him to the law of karma. There is no alternative to this way for man.
Thank you. So this verse describes what happens if you do live according to the Ishavasya principle, if you don't disobey the laws of nature. So it's all the positive effects, and then the next verse, next week, will describe what happens if you don't live according to the Ishavasya principle. So it's the same way Krishna was teaching us in Bhagavad Gita so many times. He said, if you do this, this is the result. And if you do the opposite is the result. I give you the choice. I give you the effects or the results of the choices, and now you make your decision. It's the same idea here. So kurvan eveha karmani, the first line, means that if you work in this way, if you continuously, Prabhupada says, doing continuously, if you live in this way, if you work in this way, the in this way, eveha or eva, means that by not encroaching on others' property, only taking your quota, living according to the Ishavasya principle. So if you live in this way, then jijivishet chatam sama, then you can live for hundreds of years. So in one sense, we all want to live eternally. Nobody wants to die unless the suffering is so great. But in general, the idea is that we don't want to die. But if somebody lives sinfully, then the longer they live, the worse it gets. So it's not just the length of life, but what you live, what you do in that life, that really matters. There is this little story. I hope I remember all of it. But there was this sadhu, and he was giving benedictions to a prince, a butcher, a yogi, and a devotee. So to the prince, he said, may you live and not die. May you live a long life and you not die. To the butcher, he said, may you not live and not die. To the yogi, he said, may you die immediately. And to the devotee, he said, may you live or die. Okay. So to the prince, he said, may you live and never die. Because the prince is really enjoying his life. Everything is really good. But as soon as he dies, he's going to start getting reactions for all the sinful activities he committed. So it's better for him to live as long as he can. To the butcher, he said, may you not live and not die. Because if you live, you're going to commit more and more atrocious sinful activities. And when you die, you're going to get the reactions for that. So it's better for you not to live and not die. To the yogi, he said, may you die immediately. Because the yogi is doing all these austerities, which is quite painful for the body. But when he dies, he will get all the good reactions for it and he can enjoy that. So may you die immediately, so you don't have to suffer any longer with these austerities, and then you can enjoy the results. And to the devotee, he said, may you live or die. Because for a devotee, it doesn't matter. In this life, he performs devotional service, he's not creating any bad reactions. And when he dies, he goes back to Krishna and he enjoys there. So in this life, next life, it's all happy for the devotee. The point of the story is that it's not just a case that, okay, I want to live for 100 years or hundreds of years, as it says in this verse, but what you do in that life, that matters. And when the verse says, Evam tvai nanyate tosti, there is no alternative than this. It means that everything else leads to disaster. So if you don't work in this way, following the Ishavasya principle, then everything else leads to disaster. And the reason for that is na karma lipyate nare, because if you live in this way, if you follow the Ishavasya principle, then you're not binding yourself, you're not creating karma bandhana. So that's the idea of the verse. Now, the purport. So Prabhupada, first of all, speaks about karma bandhana. So karma bandhana means the bondage of work, the bondage created by our work. And it's not just like work in the sense that when we're digging a hole or working in the office, it's anything we do in this sense. It's considered karma. And then Prabhupada speaks about why there is death when one wants to live 100 years. So that's the first paragraph. Then second paragraph, human life offers a chance of liberation through akarma, which means becoming free from the causes of death or the causes of bad reactions. The third paragraph, the Vedas ultimately lead to akarma. That's their conclusive teaching. The point is that the Vedas might say other things as well, like a lot of the Vedic verses speak about karma kanda, you should worship Indra, you should worship Chandra, Surya, and then you get this benediction, and then you can go to the heavenly planets and get a nice wife, a nice husband, whatever else. And that's also Vedic instruction, but the ultimate, the conclusive teaching is that get out of the material world and go back to God. So that's more like a step on the path, these karma kanda teachings. And then the fourth verse, begin by bringing God into a sense gratificatory life. So you can't jump from being completely absorbed in sense gratification to becoming a pure devotee overnight. So that's why the Vedas give these other kind of, I don't know, transitional is the right word, but teachings that kind of on the way to becoming a pure devotee. Fifth paragraph, without God, everything is in vain. So whatever you do, even if you are a very philanthropic, charitable person, if God consciousness is not involved in your charitable activities, then ultimately it's in vain. When Divya Vrindavan was speaking about being a social worker, and she mentioned how, children are abused by, parents who only think about themselves. And then quite often these abused children grow up to be abusers themselves because of the trauma or because they don't know anything else. It's like a vicious cycle. So unless there is God in the picture, then everything is in vain. And you can't really solve the world's problems unless there is Krishna consciousness involved. And then make all altruism into karma yoga. Karma yoga means you're working, but you connect your work to God, to transcendence, and that makes it yoga. So not just karma, but karma yoga. And then you get lasting benefit. And then last paragraph, how to live according to Ishavasya, how to practice devotional service. So I think last time it was Kat who explained what's Ishavasya, right? Was it you, Kat? Okay, so anyone other than Kat remembers what's the Ishavasya principle? Shall we go back to the verse? Oh, Yashoda Priya. Let's see.
Understanding that the Supreme Lord is the proprietor of everything and acting according to that principle.
Perfect. Very good. So Krishna is the controller and enjoyer and proprietor of everything and living accordingly. Very good. Okay, because it keeps coming up, the Ishavasya principle. So it's very important that we understand what the Ishavasya principle is that we're supposed to be living according to. Okay. So if we go through the purport, first of all, Prabhupada speaks about how karma bandhana causes death. The soul is eternal. We are eternal. So it's against our nature to die. It's something very, very unnatural for us. And when the body dies, it's a very miserable experience. Even though the soul doesn't die, it's, you know, it has to lose something that it's identified with. It's because of the identification that we are suffering, that we feel miserable when the body dies and when we get sick. It's a little bit like, I'm not suggesting that anybody goes to the cinema, but I'm sure we all have some experience of watching a movie. And it's a really good movie, it's really well done, and you start identifying with the hero. And when the hero suffers or dies, then you feel so much pain. You might even start crying. It really stirs your heart. And that's because you identify with the hero. So in the same way, or even much more, we identify with our body. We think this is us. So when the body is kind of pained, or when the body dies, then we suffer because we think we are the body. Just as we identify with the hero in the movie, we identify with the body. But the soul doesn't die. So the soul is not actually suffering. Matter was never alive anyway. So it doesn't die, it doesn't suffer. So the only person that suffers is the soul that misidentifies with the body. Okay. So now it's much easier to say than to realize, I'm sitting here giving this lecture and preaching, but, when I have a headache, then I immediately take some paracetamol because I've not realized that I'm not this head. But we should kind of try to contemplate this and try to practice it. And that will help us, especially towards the end of life, to understand that we are not the body, we are eternal, Sachidananda. And then to the extent that we identify with the body, and to the extent we desire to enjoy through the body, we are bound by karma, this karma bandhana. So it's not so much what we do, but what's the motivation behind what we do that creates the bondage. I give this example many times that Arjuna and Duryodhana were both firing arrows on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. Arjuna wasn't bound by that activity. In fact, he was elevated. It was pure devotional service because he was doing it for Krishna. The very exact same activity, firing arrows, it created karma bandhana, it created bondage for Duryodhana because he was doing it for himself, for his own enjoyment. Okay. Now, human life is the only life when we create karma, and it's also the only life when we can become free from karma. Because we can follow the scriptures, we can perceive higher realities, we can strive to attain higher realities. So human life is the only life when we create karma, and it's also the only life when we can become free from it. So animals also suffer, human beings also suffer, but only human beings have the chance to become free from it, or even understand that they're suffering. Now, to understand this karma a bit more, we had this slide before in Bhagavad Gita when we were studying chapter 4, but just to remind everybody. So karma, this word karma, we hear it often, but it's a little bit difficult to explain. And the reason for that is because it's got many meanings. Karma can mean any type of action, work, any type of work. It can mean the system of action and reaction. So meaning like somebody says, well, that was your karma. So that's how the law of karma works. So that's the system of action and reaction. And karma also means reaction for our actions. So sometimes you get these little videos on YouTube saying instant karma. And somebody is really nasty to someone else, and then they step out the door, and I don't know, a brick falls on their head, or car hits them, or whatever, they get mugged. So, and it says, you were nasty, and now you get the reaction. Something nasty happens to you. So that's the reaction. That's the that's the reaction meaning of karma. But karma, not in what we speak about in the Isopanisad here, but when we were speaking in chapter 4, their karma meant action in terms of duties prescribed in the scriptures. So karma actually has a positive meaning as well, that we act according to scriptures. And the opposite of that karma, action in terms of duties prescribed in the scriptures, is vikarma, which is sinful action or acting against the scriptures. And then vikarma also means sinful reactions. So it can both mean sinful action and sinful reaction. And akarma, again, has two meanings. One is action without reaction, action that doesn't create reaction because it's for the Lord, it's not for selfish reasons. And akarma also means inaction. So both kinds of akarma don't create a reaction. One of them is still active, but it's active for the Lord. And the other one is just stops all activities. And that's how it's not creating a reaction. Okay. But for devotees, the way to achieve this freedom from karma bandhana is by acting for Krishna. Because if we are not selfishly motivated in our actions, then we don't create reaction and we can become free from karma bandhana. So that's the second paragraph Prabhupada speaks about, how human life offers a chance of liberation through akarma. So by not working for ourselves, not working for sense gratification, then we become free from karma. Yashoda Priya, you got a question?
I just wanted to ask about karma in terms of this definition on inaction, because it reminds me in, I think, was it the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna says that action or inaction in action, action in inaction. Is it not the case that some forms of inactivity are a form of negligence and therefore will generate a form of reaction?
Yeah, that's actually if you go deeper in that verse, karmanya karmaya pashyeta karmani cha karmaya sabuddhima manusheshu sayukta Krishna karma krit. One who sees action in inaction and inaction in action is intelligent among men. That's the same point that you are making, is that one is that practically speaking, you can't avoid action. because you need to eat, you need to breathe. You can't completely stop action because then you're dead. And the other thing is, unless you are working for Krishna, you're creating reactions. So, because unless you're working for Krishna, you are negligent of your duty. So we can kind of go into the little details and get into all the complications of, you know, what creates what kind of action and this kind of karma, akarma, vikarma. But the ultimate issue is that unless, if you work for Krishna, you don't get a reaction and you become free from previous reaction. If you don't work for Krishna, you can kind of do everything possible, but still you can't become free from reaction because there is always going to be some. You get Jains, it's a kind of religion, it's mainly in India, and they try to avoid reaction by, they wear these masks so they don't breathe in little germs or they don't kill them. And they kind of try really hard not to step on anything, you know, try to avoid any violence whatsoever to avoid reaction, to avoid karma. But we know that it's impossible because as soon as you breathe, even if you wear a mask, there are even tinier germs that go through the mask. If you drink water, there are germs in the water. Anything you eat, there is a reaction. Even if you eat apples from the tree, you know, the people who picked the apples, who transported the apples and then created global warming, and then they used the money that they got for the apples for some nefarious purposes. So you just can't avoid, as long as you live in the world, you can't avoid reactions. And that's why the only way to avoid it is by working for Krishna. Did that clarify things or? Yeah, okay. Okay. Okay, but it's a really important point. As we studied Bhagavad Gita, it came up again and again and again, and 9 Isopanisad as well, that you need to work for Krishna, otherwise you're creating future suffering for yourself. Next, in the third paragraph, Prabhupada quotes a lot of Bhagavad Gita verses, and also later on in this purport, other purpose as well in Isopanishad, Prabhupada quotes Bhagavad Gita a lot to elaborate on points from Isopanishad. He explains how this akarma is taught in Bhagavad Gita as naishkarmya. It says in Bhagavad Gita 9:16, 3:9:16, the personality of Godhead says that one cannot attain naishkarmya or akarma without executing the prescribed duties mentioned in the Vedic literature. Okay, and then he explains how following Vedic literature means that gradually realizing Krishna and working for him. And then he kind of clarifies or elaborates on that point in the next paragraph, saying that the spiritual life is supposed to be a replacement for material life, but you can't do it immediately. It's not that from one day to the next you can completely give up your material life and just kind of plonk spiritual life instead, you know, like in its place. So it needs to be a gradual progression. So gradually you bring God, you bring Krishna in your life more and more. Material life is unnatural for the soul, but because we lived it for so long and we identify with it so strongly, then we need to gradually elevate ourselves and gradually spiritualize our lives. I think it was Chaitanya Charan Prabhu, he made this nice point. He said, first you go to the temple, visit the temple, then you make your home into a temple, and then you make your heart into a temple. So it just becomes like more and more you become a temple. This is the gradual progression. And this is for ourselves, but the same principle applies when we preach, when we cultivate people, when we mentor people. So we need to find a balance between not being too strong and also not too relaxed or too easy. We have to be careful not to massage people's false egos, that it becomes stronger and bigger, but we also have to be careful not to pinch it or, you know, hurt it, because then they will feel insulted, they turn away from Krishna consciousness. So we need to kind of pet them gently towards in the right direction. It's a nice example. Prabhupada was preaching to bodybuilders, and that's one of the strongest bodily identification you can get, is like, that's all they think about. You know, they take all these supplements so they can look better, and they kind of look at themselves, you know, all their muscles, and they spend hours and hours and hours every day to the body, which is completely temporary and completely useless, looks better. And it's not even for so I can serve Krishna. It's just, sometimes devotees also do sports, but so I can keep healthy and serve Krishna. But it was just a completely for its own sake. So Prabhupada told them that you should use your strength as kshatriyas and think of Lord Ram. Okay, so he used their false ego, but directed it or channeled it in a way that they can go towards Krishna. And even in the Bhagavad Gita, we see that Krishna preaches to Arjuna about not being the body. You know, he preaches about the pitfalls of the bodily identification. And in those verses, he calls him Kaunteya, Bharata, which means, O son of Kunti, O descendant of the Bharata dynasty. Well, if you're not the body, what do you have to do with the Bharata dynasty or Kunti? But it's like, it's a way of saying that you are a descendant of great people, so you should also act in a great way. So this means that we can use people's self-identification or the things that they are proud of in a way to encourage them to act in the right way. And that's what Krishna does with Arjuna also. Okay. And Prabhupada also speaks about altruism or charity, being charitable, philanthropy. So he says altruism is extended sense gratification, which might sound really strong because we think of being charitable like being selfless, because when I'm buying things for myself, then I'm selfish. But when I'm spending the same money on helping children in Africa or, you know, helping other people, then I'm being selfless. And it's true, it's not kind of directly selfish when you're helping other people. But at the same time, if Krishna is not in the picture, it's still just extended sense gratification. It still creates a reaction, because the children in Africa, if they spend the money on eating meat, or even if they don't eat meat, but eat other things that they don't offer to Krishna, it creates a reaction for them, creates a reaction for you. It is going in the right direction, but it's still not, it still doesn't free you from karma bandhana. In fact, it creates more reaction. But if you add God, if you add Krishna to the picture, then the same charitable activity becomes spiritualized. So we shouldn't kind of be dismissive about people who are trying to help others. It's more just add Krishna to the picture. And of course, we know prasadam distribution is the best way to help others. Where is this? Yeah, so any activity, even charitable activity, is just a whole lot of zeros, which is not really worth much. But if you add Krishna, the magic ingredient, the one in front of all the zeros, then it suddenly becomes, I think it's 100 billion, but anyway, the idea is that this is a lot of money. Suddenly the zero suddenly becomes a lot. So we should be very careful when we relate to kind of people who are trying to help others, not to be dismissive, not to look down on it, you know, because they are kind of sacrificing a lot. They are trying to help others. They just need a little bit of knowledge to know how to do it properly. So if somebody says, in fact, we can do this next week because this would be a discussion, and there's not so much time for that. Any questions or points? Kat, please.
Yeah, I have a question about like how to spiritualize our charity. Like, I know you've mentioned prasadam distribution, and we can give money to temples, but like, is there any other examples? You know, how to make like mundane charity spiritual? Like, if, for example, for me, I've got this dilemma now. Like, I've got so many clothes that I don't wear anymore, and I'm a bit worried. Like, if I just go to the charity shop and give them, will that sort of create karma for me?
The way I try to see it, and others might have a better way of seeing it, the way I try to see it, that this is Krishna's energy, so it shouldn't be wasted. So if somebody else can make a use of it, and that way, you know, you don't have to make so many clothes, then it's a good thing. So if you have that kind of consciousness that you relate everything to Krishna, everything belongs to Krishna, everything is Krishna's energy, you don't want to waste it, then you are in a kind of proper consciousness with your charitable activities. And sometimes, I mean, I heard different perspectives on this, so I kind of tell you both. Let's say there's a beggar asking you for money. One idea is that you don't give him money because he's going to spend it on alcohol or drugs or a meat sandwich or whatever. And that's a perfectly reasonable idea. On the other hand, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati encouraged some of his disciples to give to beggars in India. Maybe, you know, at that time, beggars in India didn't spend it on meat sandwiches, but the idea was that he said, giving even to beggars kind of creates this charitable mentality in you, that you are not the owner, you're not kind of so selfish and just insular and only thinking about yourself, but you want to help others. So you can kind of see both. Of course, the best thing is to give to devotees, to help others, to kind of give Krishna consciousness. So in that way, people can have knowledge and it can put an end to all suffering. But even sometimes just helping others with the idea that, okay, this will help me become less selfish, that's also acceptable. There's really the consciousness behind what we do that determines what reaction, if any, we get for it. Is this okay, Kat?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Okay, I guess it's 6:30. So thank you very much for your association. As always, it was very inspiring. It's really nice to see you all. There's no homework for this week. And next Saturday we'll have a class. But after that, I'm going to India. So there won't be a class for a month. And I'd like to ask all of you to please pray for us that it all goes well and we can become surcharged with Krishna consciousness when we come back, and also that everything goes well with all the traveling and all the adventures of India. So I'd like to ask all of you to please pray for us. Okay, so see you next Friday. Okay, so Hare Krishna, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Shri Isopanisad ki jai. Hari Bol.
Take care. Hare Krishna.
Hari Bol.
Everyone.